What if you could rebuild a $16,000 web app in under a week without writing a single line of code? Well, we just did. But while the AI coding hype is exploding, the reality is both more incredible and frankly more challenging than anyone is actually telling you. This new world of vibe coding is powerful, but it can also be scary, especially if, like me, you don't know how to code. Most tutorials don't show you an AI getting stuck, running up your API bills, or the major security holes that it can leave wide open in your project. They don't tell you that without the right plan, you'll end up rebuilding the same thing 3 times over, just like we did. So today, we're cutting through all of the hype and giving you the keys to our entire process for building a tool that's superior to the one we paid a developer tens of thousands of dollars for just recently. You'll get the step-by-step playbook for not just building, but also for navigating the challenges that everyone else seems to just gloss over and ignore. We'll show you how to handle the scary parts like preventing bots from draining your budget, fixing things when the AI inevitably breaks your code, and deploying it securely, all for free. So if you're not a coder yourself and want the real guide to turning AI into your personal developer without the hype and the hidden disasters, then keep watching. So Gail, show us the tool that you have built.
Okay, so I've actually built BrandSnap, which is a tool we built like 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago maybe. And the goal of this tool is to find the perfect brand when you're starting a business, because it's quite difficult to find a good .com domain or something like that.
It's so hard these days. Like going back 15 years, there was still a lot of stuff available, but now, like, honestly, every good idea is taken. Like, you really got to spend a lot of time to find a good one.
Yeah, so I wanted to use AI to kind of like try to find some good examples, good ideas. I wanted a simple tool as well. So basically it's just a prompt box. So I actually took like your wife's business idea for this one. So I put like a dog trainer in Edinburgh, Scotland that provides puppy classes, dog boarding, and behavior classes. And then you just have some options that you can trigger to say which TLD you would rather use. I didn't put local TLDs, so we'll just use .com. And you can also select which tone you want. So maybe we'll put like a playful one, for example. And then you just click find your brand. And what it does behind the scene is essentially Gemini is brainstorming domain names, and then it's going to brainstorm 50 in this case, and it's checking them against what's available. So you can see how many it checked at the top, and then the ones that appear at the bottom are the ones that are actually available. So in this case, because it's a .com, we only got 4 of them actually, but it's fine. If you want more, you actually have this brainstorm more domains button, and then it just can keep searching. And it's going to separate them as well, so you should be able to see which ones work. So you can see like it find like Canine Kinder, Walkies World, goodboyschool.com. That's a good one actually. I like goodboyschool.com. And then you can keep going. You can do up to 3 extra brainstorms basically. So that's like the main feature. Actually, I hit the search rate limit. So yeah, there's actually a limit. You cannot just spam our API for free, but that's fine. Let's just use this one. Let's say we want to register goodboyschool.com. One thing with a brand these days is that it's not just your website, right? It's also your social handles. And I think there's no real good domain brainstorming tool that allows you to do that. So we actually built that in. And this actually starts a scraper that goes on every single social platform. I think it checks 7. So it checks like Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, the ones where you actually can claim the @ for your brand. And it's going to check which ones are available, which ones are not available. Now, because it's a scraper, it can take 30 to 50 seconds.
Can I just ask, is that built at all using Appify, which you talked about in the podcast before?
Yeah, it's Appify behind the scenes, basically. And that's why it's not the fastest, because it actually has to start a scraper. So yeah, 30 to 50 seconds is usually the time it takes. But still, it saves you a lot of time compared to having to go on these platforms, etc. And you can see it was checked, and now actually all of these are available. Good Boys at Good Boys School is available. But let's imagine if it's not available, you actually have a brainstorm alternative. Let's say you really like this domain. AI will brainstorm alternative handles that you could pick. And then if you click on it, it will basically check the alternative and tell you if it's free. So you can kind of rotate until you find a good combo of domain name and social handles. So that's basically the app. Pretty simple, pretty basic.
Really cool, because most of the other domain name finding apps out there, or if it's integrated into a domain name registrar, they're just not very good. Like the suggestions that come out are kind of, just a bit shit. And they don't handle the social handles as well. So combining those two things is really strong. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was just an MVP. Also, you have AI kind of calculate the strengths of the brand. So you can see Good Boy HQ, it's not available on Twitter, it's not available on Snapchat, for example. So it's like, yeah, it makes it handy and quick to check that, basically. So that's really what the app does. Yeah, and then you can choose which TLD you want, etc. There are some limits because obviously it's using AI, it's using all of that. We can't just let people spam it like crazy. So you have a limit of like 2 searches per minute. So if you just keep spamming the domain, it will not work, but it's fast enough that it goes faster than manual search, basically.
And it's worth saying, you've vibe coded all of this. You're not a developer, and you didn't write a single line of code to create this like pretty impressive app right here. But the story of this goes back, as you said, to I think April, May 2023, when we actually
we can check Product Hunt, right? It was released in 2023. It doesn't say when.
It was April, May 2023 is when we were certainly working on it, and we hired a developer to build it. But that's actually a good point. So we spent, I looked this up, $16,270 something to build this, or to hire a developer to build this. That's not including any of our own time to do the launch and the videos and stuff around.
I did a lot of planning for it.
I mean, you worked a lot with the developer and kind of like steering it and guiding it. And it's so funny looking back on this now. Like, I remember some of the challenges we were having is like, well, it just wasn't easy to get API access from ChatGPT at the time. Only like certain accounts could get it. It was
rate limited.
Yeah, it was crazy, like compared to what you can do now. But it's big project.
Not only that, but I would say what's really interesting between that time then and this time now is like the experience didn't actually feel that different building it. The only thing is like it's as if I was with the developer as he was building it versus like he was just going away for 1 week and then I would just talk to him later. He would maybe be a bit more autonomous, the real human, but I would talk to Claude Code, which is the tool that I use to build this, quite similarly to the way I would talk to the human developer, and it just managed to build this app basically.
And you got it done faster. You did this in like a week or so versus I think we spent a couple months building that before.
The truth is I got it working in 1 day. It was working in 1 day, but because this is kind of like an app on the internet where people can just input anything they want in that box, and by just going on the domain, like as soon as I put it online, there was like literally hordes of bots trying to spam this, etc. And so I spent most of my time securing this app versus actually building it. So building the functionality is very quick. Like literally, I think a day it was working more or less like the way you see it. Not exactly, but more or less. But yeah, it's like this and just picking the right APIs, that kind of stuff, that took time.
Let's talk about why someone would want to build something like this. I mean, like, is there any monetization in it? Like, what's the purpose of it?
Yeah, I didn't show you actually. Let's go back to the app. If you click on get domain, so let's go back to Good Boy School because I like it. If you click on this, the way we monetize is we basically promote SiteGround. Like this is an affiliate link for us. So when you click on this, it actually copies the URL. So like, if I was pasting this in my address bar, like you can see you have the URL pasted. If you click on this takes you to SiteGround, and this is our affiliate link. So we actually make a commission here. It's like, hey, just paste the domain and when you check out, and that's it. But also you have the button below to just go to Namecheap that just takes you there. And normally this domain is available, as you can see, $9.98. So that worked basically. So that's how it's monetized right now. If you end up buying through one of these links, we make some money, but that's the only monetization. And that's why it's not great, to be honest. It's hard to charge for it.
It's not particularly well thought out business in the sense that there's probably a reason why other people haven't done this, because it's expensive to provide. It costs a lot.
The social handles
costs a lot to process everything, and you don't really make much money or have long-term customers out of this. However, if you were a company that had to find domains and build websites for people regularly, having an internal tool like this might be very beneficial for a small team, right?
Any hosting company could probably swallow that cost.
Yeah.
Like if you're a hosting company, come and buy this tool, please. That's how I would do it. I would actually just sell that as like, hey, start your business. And then that would plug directly into my checkout. It would pass the domain parameter and then it would feel smooth. You'd get your website live immediately. And then there's kind of opportunities to do more, right? With the image generation tools, you could add logo generation. You could brainstorm color palettes. Like I have a lot of features I could build. The reason I'm not going to build it is because the business case for it is pretty weak, actually. I wanted to learn vibe coding and that felt like a good project for it.
You said something recently that tools are the new content or something like that. Do you want to just explain what you meant by that?
Well, text content, obviously the value has decreased massively now that you can ask any question to an LLM. And, with AI mode on Google, with all of that, like it's just, not that useful because you can't personalize it to the level. An LLM will do it when you ask it a question. However, these kind of tools like ChatGPT cannot do this. ChatGPT cannot brainstorm domains, check if they're live, check the social handles, etc. So there's still value in going to a website and getting this done. And so that is an opportunity for you to, let's say like a hosting company, they could use this. And this big button literally is is like them promoting their product. That's the advertising. I think building this kind of stuff on your website is how you're going to still attract traffic that you can monetize the old way, basically. And that's going to get lots of links as well and so on, you know?
And the good news is that with Claude Code and vibe coding is that almost anyone can build stuff like this now, whereas we saw before, you would have to spend literally tens of thousands of dollars to do this just a couple years ago.
Yeah, 2.5 years ago. It feels like things have changed a lot. Now, it's not all roses and butterflies, right? It took me quite a bit of time to secure it particularly. And if you're not willing to learn, it can be a little bit tricky and even risky for people to do that. I'm not even sure I keep this app live. I've secured it as well as I could. But the truth is, if something goes bad, I'll probably just take it down because that was a cool learning experience. But the thing is, like, there's no way I could build this 2 years ago. Like, no way I could show you something on the screen that actually works, looks decent, and is actually useful. Whereas now it's possible. So for anyone willing to learn, the opportunity is very, very high compared to where it was literally a year or two ago.
And we'll sort of talk about the limitations and security issues, because I know you spent a long time trying to battle against that.
Yeah.
But if someone was building a similar tool or even something that performed a different task, but, you know, just using it internally in their team, they probably don't have to worry quite so much about, you know, like random bots hammering it and stuff.
If it's behind a login as well, that kind of stuff, it makes it much easier, basically. Like, there's simple ways to protect. This was literally the worst project to start with. So that's what I think. But yeah, you can build useful tools. And, you know, a lot of people will be like, oh, but I could build this with N8N. Not really, because like you see the speed at which it processes the domains when it checks, like N8N is much slower. You know how the pipeline just goes one by one, etc. Like, it's more difficult, and coding is still more powerful than something like N8N, for example.
So if someone is watching this and is like, oh, that looks pretty cool, I've got an idea for an app or a tool that I would like to build. How do they do it? Where do they start? Talk us through the whole process.
Okay, I'll show you where I started initially, which was on Gemini. But I did a bad job. And to be honest, that bite me in the ass later to not spend long enough to prepare a PRD. I've talked about this in previous podcasts. Basically, describe your project to Gemini.
Just so anyone who hasn't listened to previous episodes, a PRD is a product requirements document. And it's basically like a plan for what we're about to build here.
Yeah, so it's like I explain what I want, but I didn't think about, for example, where I'm going to host it. Initially, I built it in a way that wasn't going to work with the hosting I used in the end, and I had to rebuild everything. Mm-hmm. So you see, I only had a very short chat, and then I just started, which looked impressive, but it was missing a lot, basically. So the point is, you work an app. I use Gemini, but you can use Claude, you can use ChatGPT, whatever. Use the Canvas function, they all have it, and just ask it to act like a project manager for a web app that's going to create a PRD, and it's going to give you a document like that, right? So that's kind of step one, the high-level brainstorming thing. That's where you probably want to look for APIs as well, and like give the info in there, etc.
And when you're searching for APIs, are you asking AI to find it, or is that like old school Google and like check?
It's a mix of both, right? It's like I might have a Perplexity opened on the side and be like, hey, I want domain checking APIs.
Why specifically using Perplexity for that rather than continuing to use Gemini?
Mostly because I don't want to like spam this chat with other things than updating the document. So the context stays clean, you know? Otherwise, you know, it will mix it up. Like we're chatting about this, then we're changing our mind as we're researching. It might still add it in the document and I'll miss it, for example. So I prefer having like another chat.
I mean, you could have another chat in Gemini and do the same thing, no?
Yeah, if you want. It's just Perplexity has a bit better search, I think, for example.
Yeah,
so
I find because it seems to be designed primarily, I guess, for like news and current events, that like anything new, it does a much better job of like understanding.
So new versions of
recent.
APIs as well. Yeah. So things like that. And so like that's why it's like I'll just put it on the side. Maybe I'll be like, okay, I need to figure out the API. I'll just type this. Then once I find something that is handy, I'll just go in this chat. I'll be like, hey, I think we're gonna use this API. What do you think? And I will then update this without having its context with like 10 messages about that one API. You know?
And are you saying literally like, what do you think? Or are you saying, please use this?
Yeah,
like,
sometimes I do.
So
because what it does, it kind of like it's a second opinion.
It's more discussion,
Yeah, it can be a second opinion. Where it's like, it can still use search. And so it might be like, oh yeah, it's pretty good. Oh no, actually I found this thing online. People say it's not reliable as an API, whatever. It's nice to get multiple opinions from multiple LLMs. I do that quite a bit, actually. Point is, you should land with a document that has a lot of what you want to do on a conceptual level here, right? Before you even code anything. That's the boring part. That's the part people don't want to hear about.
But it's because you need to get this right. It's like writing an article or, you know, going on vacation without planning it. Like at the fundamental level, you need to have some kind of structure for where you're going with this.
Yep, exactly.
I think that's what's missing when I see a lot of people on YouTube talk about vibe coding is they just dive straight into it and have a really like crappy cookie cutter example of what they're trying to build. And it's like, that's not the reality of how people build things before vibe coding, or certainly certainly after it as well.
Yeah, and if you don't plan it, like AI is going to build it wrong most of the time. It happens quite often. It happens for BrandSnap as well. I basically built it 2 or 3 times over mistakes like this. So if I did it again today, I would spend much more time on that planning phase. And that would probably save me several days of work. Point is, once you have your plan, you want a code editor. Like you want a place where the code is going to be written. I use Cursor, even though I use Claude Code, it's kind of weird, but Cursor has a free plan, right? It's like I use the free plan on Cursor now. And the reason why is it still has a bunch of AI features that are handy. So let's just install it and I'll show you some of the features. It's going to be easier than just talking about it. So let's say you install Cursor, you open it, you're going to land on a window like this, basically. It's just like an empty window. And then you click on just open project and you basically make a new folder. So we call it podcast demo 2 because I made one already, because that was my planning. And then you click open and you basically land on this window here. This is the Cursor chat, which you get to use a little bit for free. So it's like you could chat with it the same way you would with Claude Code, but Claude Code is actually better now. So I'm going to close this chat. And then what you need to start is you need to start a new terminal.
Ooh,
terminal is the scary part. Yeah, it's the scary part, but it will look like a chat in 2 minutes, right? And then the way you actually install Claude Code is if you go on their website, they just have a page called Claude Code Overview, and they're like, how to install it. And you just go and copy this line. And you go back to Cursor, and you paste this line. And it just processes, and it installs. And that's it.
So you install Claude Code in Cursor?
In the terminal in Cursor, yeah.
Okay.
So that's all I did for now. Now, if I just type Claude here, you will see that it actually, let me make the terminal a bit bigger so you can see. You can see it's like, do you trust the files in this folder? Like, it's empty right now, this folder. So yeah, I trust it. And now, basically, this is closed. So if I say hi, it should reply to me. It's connected. It will ask you to connect it initially, but once you've connected your account, which you can do through a paid Claude plan. So all paid Claude plans now allow you to use your limit inside this, including for vibe coding. So you can start at $20 per month. Or you can put your API key, which is not recommended. It's a lot more expensive. So don't do that, basically. Once you've done that, one thing you want to do is you want this terminal to be able to see the files that will be in your text editor, right? So if I click here, I can make a file. So I call it like file.md, for example. And now I have a file and I can write things on the top, you see?
What does a
But
MD mean?
code Markdown. It's the Markdown. It's like a text file, basically.
Okay. Is that what's used for coding? I don't know.
It's just a place to put plain text, basically. Okay. So if I'm documenting, if I'm whatever, it's like this way I can like, you know, a hashtag is a headline, for example, and then like stars is bold, etc. Like that's how you format, basically. Make sense?
Yep.
It's 2 stars is bold. This was italic, sorry. Point is, you want to integrate it so you can see the file. So you type /IDE. See, it says manages IDE integrations. And here you select Cursor. You click OK. And when you do that, this little star here will appear, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quit this terminal. Yeah. And then I'm going to make it smaller. And now, because it's going to just act as a normal terminal, and now I can click on this Run Claude Code button. And now Claude Code is going to show a little bit like the Cursor chat was showing, right? So I have a little chat on the right with my AI. I have, let me make the window a bit bigger maybe. I have the file that I'm working on, and I have the list of my files here, right? So that's like, I already have a Claude Code that I can chat with now. It's connected. I can talk to it. Now, the power of Claude Code is it can have crazy capabilities, right? So one of these capabilities, for example, there's a MCP server that I want to show you that is called Context 7 that I found. What Context 7 MCP does is it has access to all the documentation of all the web frameworks, the latest one. And so what Claude does is it doesn't rely on its training data. It relies on the latest version of things to build things, which means it doesn't build outdated stuff, which means it's more secure, basically. So if you install this MCP on Claude Code, it will automatically be able to go and read the documentation of everything very easily. And so you'd literally just find this page on GitHub, and there's a site called smithery.ai that lists all the MCPs if you want. So you find this page, and you can see they have installation guides for everything. So I say installing Claude Code. And then all you have to do is basically grab this code here, the local server connection, go back to your terminal. Actually, let's just make a new one. And I'm going to paste this line I found on GitHub, right? I didn't have to come up with anything. And now I click this, and it says added MCP context 7. So now to update it, I just need to close this Claude Code thing. So I'm going to terminate it, reopen it. And if I type /MCP, you can see now I see this context 7, for example. So now it has access to the documentation. I'm not going to do like a million MCP installations, but I'll show you one just so that you understand how this works.
Let's zoom out a second and like tell us like what happens if you don't use these MCP servers? Does it like just code in outdated stuff basically?
It could. It's going to rely on its knowledge. It might do some web search and find the latest information, but it's not going to be as reliable. So like you essentially give powers to your Claude Code. So if I go on like Smithery, for example, like there's a bunch of these. Like you can give it a Supabase MCP server. So it's like it can integrate with a database, for example. You can give it desktop commander, so it can interact with the files on your desktop. You can give it access to GitHub. You can give it access to Notion. You can give it access to your Slack. You know what I mean? It can get all the context it needs to do its work, basically. And so that's the point. You kind of install these to give it some powers. And so like in this case, like this context 7 one is a pretty good one. So now, since I'm showing you how to set stuff up, we might as well just start something and just talk while it's working so you can see how it works, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to ask it to essentially rebuild something close enough to our homepage on Authority Hacker. Let's say that. So like we can see how Claude Code actually does some work and we can see it live on the podcast, basically. So I'm going to ask it, and you can see there's some errors on the side. But the point is I'm going to ask it to go on this page. I'm going to ask it to go and download the images and download the stuff that it needs, etc. Make a plan, and then use a framework called Astro. Astro is probably what I'm going to rebuild our site on eventually. Think of it like WordPress for code. Like this is a framework that allows you to build websites, actually in CSS and HTML, very basic ones. It's a very popular framework now. It's very fast. And so again, you need to know about this, but you could ask an AI, what's a good framework to build a website? And you can see they just tell you to install Astro, you need this command. So you just copy this, you go back to cursor, and in my terminal, I could just type npm create Astro latest, and it's going to install it for me.
So is this part specifically designed for vibe coders out there?
You could ask Claude to potentially install it for you. It just takes longer because it just asks you for each question when it's installing, as you can see here. Here, I'm just going to tell it to just do it, you know? And so now we have a folder that is being created, and there's the base of your website here, right? But now Claude Code can see this file structure. So it can start working, right? And then I'll show you, actually, let's start the server when it's ready. So you can see it's done, it's installed. Now I get my terminal back. Let's do that. And then if you just run a command that, again, you could ask Claude Code, but to save some time, I'm just going to do it, right? I need to change directory because I'm not in the directory. It made a subdirectory. So I need to change the directory. So I do cd steadfast rotation. That's what it called it. Up. And here I can put npm run dev. And essentially, my website is now started on my local machine. If I click on this link, you can see I have a website running that Claude Code can now interact with, right? So again, I've learned this by talking to AI.
So you've essentially installed WordPress without a template here for anyone like still thinking in those terms.
Basically.
Yeah.
And again, this command to install was given to me on the homepage of the framework given to me by AI. So I found it with AI. I copied this. It asked me a few questions on like, do you want to use Tailwind CSS? You basically say yes to everything. That's the default install. And that's what we have here. So it's like, this is just an empty website that can be edited, but that has CSS, that has all of that, right? So now we can go on cursor and we're going to give it some work and we're going to talk about BrandSnap, okay?
Let's do that. But first, let's have a quick word from today's sponsor, Fat Joe. If you've ever tried digital PR, you know the frustration. 72% of PR professionals say it's harder to get results in 2025 than ever before. Journalist inbox are more crowded, and most agencies charge premium prices without guaranteeing any coverage. Fat Joe's digital PR campaigns solve this by guaranteeing a minimum number of successful links with every campaign. So instead of hoping for coverage, you get guaranteed placements in authority media outlets. What makes them different is their proven track record. They've generated over 100 links for clients in publications like Yahoo News, MSN, and The Sun, with one campaign delivering an 85% traffic increase in just 1 month. Their campaigns are built around expert commentary and original data that journalists actually want to cover, not generic pitches that get ignored. Plus, everything is 100% white label, so other agencies can deliver premium PR results to their clients without the premium price tag. Check out fatjoe.com/PR campaigns to see how guaranteed digital PR coverage can transform your link building strategy today. Thanks again to Fat Joe for sponsoring this episode.
Now we're back in Claude Code, and the thing is, like, you don't necessarily want the AI to build something right away. You kind of want it to think about its plan first. And so, like, one thing with vibe coding is you want the AI to think about it. So if I press Shift Tab, you can see that this is changing at the bottom. The mode is changing, and I can press it until I see Plan Mode On. Plan Mode On means Claude is not going to write any code. It's just going to explore things and actually make a plan. But before I do that, I'm actually going to go back to my normal mode and I'm going to do /init. What does /init does? It means that Claude is actually going to review all the code we already have here from this Astro website.
Does that stand for initialize, by the way? Or? Is that
Yeah.
okay?
So what it's going to do is it's going to analyze all these files and be like, oh, okay, I understand. Now this is an Astro website, which is a framework it knows about. This is where I did the page. This is where I did the CSS, etc. And it's going to make itself a little notebook with like rules for the project that it can use every time it gets some instructions.
So you're
So that's
basically
what I'm
loading up context for what you're building here.
pretty much. And it's building its own context. It's going to make itself notes because, you know, LLMs, they don't remember stuff. So you can see project overview. This is an Astro 5 project, blah, 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 architecture framework. You can see just wrote that file basically. And I'm like, do you want to make this change to CloudMD? Yep, sure. And that's it. And it made itself a little note and now it understands. So now we have this. I go back to my plan mode and I prepared a quick prompt. We'll see how it goes. This is live AI, so it can go wrong. That's why I prepared like another version that I tested before the podcast so I can show you if it goes wrong, right? But the prompt says, I want you to rebuild the Authority Hacker homepage on this Astro install. Make sure to use Tailwind CSS for the design system. So like Tailwind CSS is the CSS system inside Astro. Download all the images and a copy of the original to make sure that you use this for the final page. Use context 7, which is the MCP we installed together with the documentation, remember? Before starting to understand the latest Astro features, which you should use. And then I tell it to think step by step. And when you say think step by step in this, what it does, it triggers the reasoning mode in Claude because it can be reasoning or not reasoning, right? So it's going to spend a bit more time thinking. And as a result, you should get better results. And you know, I realized I forgot to give it the URL of Authority Hacker. So I'm going to tell it that as well. So I'll be like URL of AH, and I'll be like authorityhacker.com. And what we're going to do is we're going to let it do its plan, and we can talk a little bit, but you can let it run if you want, and we'll see. So that's how Claude Code works. And you can see it asks me every time it wants to do something. So for example, it says, hey, can I use context 7? Am I allowed? And I can say yes, or I can say yes, don't ask me anymore. You can always use it. And then it's just going to basically be using context 7 and search for Astro and search for the documentation. And you see it's reasoning and having its own little monologue here.
This really feels in a way like, you know, actually having a human developer just sitting next to you going and do it. Because it's, you know, I think a lot of people are used to AI. You ask it a question, it gives you an answer either straight away or like in a few seconds. But this seems to actually just go away and work for like quite a long time, right?
Sometimes for things like testing, like before you start coding and before you deploy, you run tests to see that your functions are working properly for an app. I've had it do this testing for up to an hour, actually. Like one time I launched it to do the testing and I went to the gym and I came back and I had the report with all the testing it had done. I had finished like 15 minutes before I came back or something. So not every time, like this will not take an hour, but the plan will probably take a few minutes. And then after that to download the images, etc., it will work for a while actually. So yeah, you can see it came up with a plan actually. So it tells me, here's the plan. He didn't do anything. He just thought, I will install Tailwind CSS, right? Because it's missing this framework that it's missing. I will configure it with Astro, which is this framework. And then I will update the project structure, essentially the documentation to say, hey, I've done this. And then it's going to start downloading the original images from the Authority Hacker homepage. It's going to optimize them through the framework that we have. It's going to, you know, essentially organize things, set up the fonts as well. It found which fonts we use on the site, which are correct, by the way. So it went on the site and found them. And then it's going to start building the different sections, like the hero section, the header, blah, 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 one by one. It's going to make sure they're responsive. It's going to implement the color palette, the typography, the spacing, and then content structure, static content, image optimization, blah, 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 technical implementation. And it's going to actually check that it's done properly. And then it tells you what you can expect at the end of these tasks, basically, which is a fully functional homepage matching Authority Hacker's design, optimized images and asset, responsive layout, clean modern code structure, and then using Tailwind CSS. And if I say yes, it's going to do all of that on its own. Let's just do it. Let's see what we get. It's going to do its own little task list, and it's going to go through the tasks one by one, basically. So like,
what happens when it encounters a problem? It just thinks how to solve it and tries to solve it. Great.
Yeah, so you can see it made a to-do list. And now it's going to essentially go through its to-do list and essentially while we're talking, do some work. But the point is, I don't think it's going to look exactly like Authority Hacker, but it would be a good base to start from. Like, it's not perfect either. Like, it's not magic, but it's a big step up. So you can see it keeps asking me to install things. So for example, every time it installs something new, it will tell me, hey, I'm going to install this. Are you okay with that? Again, good idea to have a little Gemini on the side and ask, hey, is it safe to install this on my project or things like that, right? So I'm going to tell it to install here. And you can see actually it made a mistake. Sometimes it makes mistakes. It's like, oh, I need to run it correctly. I ran it wrong. So I'm just going to say, okay. And now it worked basically. So it fixes its mistakes and it keeps working. So that's Claude basically. That's how I built BrandSnap. Now there's kind of two modes when you work in this. There's when you create new features, which essentially that's what we're doing here. We're creating a new page and debugging because you build things and they're buggy and they're not exactly how you want them, etc. And so there's kind of like different workflows for that, right? And I'm going to keep saying yes, by the way, as it's going, because this is quick live demo, basically. But whenever you're doing either of these, you should spend a long time in the plan mode. Like I approved the first plan initially, but during building BrandSnap, for example, I often said, no, I don't like what you did. You're not using the right API. It makes stupid mistakes as well. So you should read the plan and actually push back, because otherwise the problem is once you approve everything like I'm doing now, and if you didn't read the plan, you're going to end up on the other side with like essentially a mountain of code that doesn't work properly, right? And it's not what you want. And if you do that multiple times, your code becomes very messy. And the more messy it gets, the less efficient this is, because essentially it struggles reading through it, it struggles deciding, etc. And so that's the problem. And that's why you should spend a lot of time in plan mode more than you do in build mode. Now we're doing this quickly because we have the time limit of a podcast. But if I was doing this properly, I'd probably spend a long time chatting with it, making sure each section is the way I want it, etc.
So like how many total hours do you think you spent actually managing it when you built BrandSnap? Bearing in mind you were learning it at the same time.
Yeah, it wasn't efficient. I could do it in less, but I probably spent 20 hours, I would say. But I've built it in an infrastructure that didn't make sense initially, and then I had to rebuild it. The security wasn't good enough, so I had to rebuild it from scratch. I had to change the API for domain checking because it was too expensive. I didn't have enough for the price. So again, I had to change to a cheaper one, and then it changed how we use it. And yeah, a lot of inefficiencies that I've learned from.
If you can think back to when we built it in 2023, how much time do you think you spent managing the developer there?
Not much less. I think I probably spent maybe 12 hours to 14 hours managing. So it was a bit less still, but not a lot less. And I think that's what's quite important.
Okay, so let's zoom in on that API issue that you mentioned before. How do you identify that? Like, someone who's not a coder, like what were the red flags there?
The red flags was actually like when we built it like 3 years ago, I used the same API basically, but it has changed. And now before it could check like, let's say 50 domains at once, and that was one API call. Whereas now it's one API call per domain checked. And so like the credits went a lot faster. We actually were on a plan that was like 10,000 API domain checked per month, which sounds like a lot. But let's say you do one search and it uses 50 API credits to check 50 domains. And then you add an extra brainstorm, that's an extra 30. Like one user can use over 100 with one search, basically. So it goes very fast. It was a good API, but the truth is it would be incredibly expensive if BrandSnap was actually used by a lot of people. So I had to find a cheaper API. And so I found one. The problem is it wasn't as fast and reliable, which is why like when you do your search on BrandSnap, sometimes it will just kind of stop for 2 or 3 seconds and then kind of resume later, because essentially the API has failed and it just has to wait a few seconds before it works again. And so like the logic is built in the app. We get 1 million checks for $5 per month, which is a lot more reasonable. And so like that's something I should have thought about in the planning that I haven't, for example. If I was rebuilding BrandSnap today, I would take each API and you can ask Cloud Code. You can put a variable inside a file in your code base with your API key. And you can be like, hey, just run some API tests for me. Like try to run 20 in a row, try to run 30 in a row and tell me if it works properly. And so like I would probably run things like that before I even build the app, which I should have done. And that would have saved me all that time, because what I did is I built on this old API and then I hit the problem and then I had to essentially undo everything and redo everything, which broke the app. And then I had to rebuild stuff basically because I had to rethink around the limitations and so on. So that's my mistake. Like I should have done better. And I've learned the hard way that I should plan more.
And, there's always the risk that if you, put a credit card behind an API and then like a bunch of bots hammer it or something, you end up with a massive bill. So what can people do to kind of prevent against that from happening if they're building things?
Okay. First of all, it's a little bit dangerous. Your API key should not be in your code. The way you store an API key on an app like this is actually on the hosting level, where you actually have a place like I use Cloudflare, where you essentially set your secrets, and then that's a variable that can be called in the code, but is never visible in the code, right? It just says like, oh, I use this variable that is inside the hosting, the server that is not exposed to people. And then that is called that way. So it's like, that's one of the things. But most importantly, and let me just accept some Cloud Code stuff because it wants to keep working. And most importantly, I have an app that I'm using now called CodeRabbit that works with GitHub. So I haven't talked about GitHub, but the way you save your code is using GitHub. So you make a repository, as you can see on my window here, and then you can like commit it. So you can just click on AI is going to essentially write what this is about, and then the save point basically. And the point is between 2 save points, you can ask this CodeRabbit app to check the difference in code and find security issues. And that's a paid app normally, but they give you 1 check every hour for free. And then they will find things like API keys exposed or like poorly coded security features and rate limiting and all of that. And they will flag it. And not only do they flag it, but they give you a prompt to give to your AI to fix it. So I go back to Claude in plan mode, and essentially you get this thing that you copy, and then you paste it in the plan mode, and you say, what do you think of this code suggestion? Does it make sense? Claude will make you a plan. If it makes sense, will tell you, does it make sense or not? And then if you just basically tell it to implement, it will implement it because CodeRabbit also tells you how to fix it. And that's kind of like a fine-tuned model that's made to find AI code mistakes, basically. So I'm not saying it's foolproof because it's another AI checking, but it did find quite a lot of issues when I ran through it, and that helps with security. Another thing that I've relied a lot on for security, and let's go back to the browser, is actually using a lot of Cloudflare features for that. I'm using this Cloudflare turnstile, which is the equivalent of a CAPTCHA, right? And so when you go on BrandSnap, before you click on find your brand, like when you click on find your brand, it essentially first runs that CAPTCHA before the search goes through. And so
that's like an invisible captcha, basically.
Yeah. So what it does is it just does some challenges and JavaScript challenges, etc. And if you don't pass, this does not reach our API, basically. So like you could type this, and that's why the search takes a second or two to start, because essentially it's the security triggering. And that's a little bit annoying to the user, but that saves us a lot of trouble because this turnstile feature is not vibe coded. It's built by Cloudflare, by real top-end engineers that know what they're doing. And so what happens is that blocks a lot of robots, basically. So that's one way you secure things. Is like Cloudflare has a lot of features like that. They have a bot monitoring thing where they already know a lot of bot traffic from every site they run, basically. And then they block them by default. Like every time they land on your site, it doesn't even load the page, right? For example. And so that's why I wanted to host this on Cloudflare, because they have all these features and it's all free, by the way. You don't have to pay for anything. Well, another thing that you can do for security that it's super obvious, but you can rate limit your API keys quite often. So for example, Gemini API key that does the brainstorming, it's actually limited at like 30 pounds or something. Once it hits that, it will just stop working. The app will break, it will not work, but it will not charge us thousands of pounds. So like one of the things to do is create a unique API key for all these things and rate limit them. Same with Apify, it cannot go past the amount of credit on the account, for example. So it's like worst case, our account gets maxed out for 1 month, but we don't have a massive bill.
I think that's really important to do because you're dealing with a lot of code that you don't necessarily understand here. So like if something does slip through the cracks, then you always have that backstop that you do understand that you can set that hard limit on and just, control things that way.
Yeah. So if we go back to our Claude code for a second, you actually see it finished its task. I think it exaggerated a little bit, but it said it's a pixel perfect recreation of the whole page. So again, it's very cool that it was able to go on our website, download images, and put them, like you essentially have like a walking landing page with the real testimonial photos, the real people, all of that, right? That's kind of cool. And in a way, some of these elements, I like them better than the original site. But it's not a pixel perfect recreation. So that if I was working with Claude Code now, like you actually go back to your code, then you go in your source, and then you can essentially see all the assets that it downloaded. You can see the layouts and the pages, etc. And you go in your components and in sections, and normally you should essentially see the different section, right? You see hero section, 4C model, etc. This is essentially what we see. So like hero is basically this section here, right? So I would probably just go back in Claude Code, go back in plan mode, and you can tag files. So I could say like @hero section and then give it maybe a screenshot. So maybe I'd go on the real homepage, I'd be like taking a screenshot, and then you can actually say, this does not look like the original at all. Plan to make it similar, check screenshot. And what I can do is I press shift and I drag my screenshot on the chat, and actually in the terminal, it actually sends images. So it can actually look at the image and compare what there is. And so normally now it's going to make a plan, it's going to make it a bit closer. But the point is then you kind of refine as you go, but it was able to build a decent landing page. So it's asking me, can I check the screenshot? And it's actually reading the file that I tagged to understand the difference between what it sees on the image and what the file is actually like. And now it's going to prepare a plan to fix it. And then again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time debating with it right now because this is the podcast, but you should, right? So I'm going to tell it, as you see, it made a big plan, and then I'm going to click yes, and it's going to go. And now I just want to say I'm using the Sonnet model, but you could use the Opus model, and it's like even better. The problem is like you can run out of limits quite quickly on the Opus model, basically. So you can see I approved it. It made it a little to-do list, and now it's going to start working again and editing our website. But that gives you an idea of what the workflow looks like in terms of editing the website. And I could give it copy, I could give it whatever I want, basically.
So at the moment, when you're viewing that website, it's being published essentially on your local computer. So I can't access that. If you want to host it, what's the next steps there?
Okay, again, Cloudflare is probably your best bet here. Cloudflare, if you log in, you have these workers here. And workers, it's a little bit complicated to explain. It's basically non-permanent hosting. Like they start the server when there's a request. which means it's off if nobody's looking at it, basically. But the start time is so fast that you won't notice. And then because they use their CDN as well, etc., you will not notice the difference. But the point is, you see I'm on a free plan here, right? And I have 100,000 requests per day. Now, a request is not so obvious, not like a visit. It's kind of like, either running an API or like a function or something like this. But for a simple website, you could almost assimilate it to a page view, basically. Something like that. Again, can be more complicated, but I don't want to go into detail. The point is that this seems complicated when you look at it. But Cloudflare has a tool that you can install on your terminal, and Cloud Code can interact with it. So if you go to Cloud Code and you say, hey, I want to host it as a Cloudflare worker, then it will just push it for you. It will ask you to log in once, and then your terminal will have access, and it's going to do it for you. And actually, I've started redoing the Marketing Pro website, and so they already have a staging version. So if I go in settings, and if I go on this URL, you can see that essentially Cloud Code worked like maybe a few hours and it built a basic version of their site again. And you can see this is a real URL. Right? Again, I can put this on a real website eventually. I can assign a real domain to this. But the point is that it was able, again, the buttons are a bit broken, so it needs some work, but it was able to build a bunch of the pages on the site, and it's using Astro like I showed you. It downloaded all the images and rebuilt a bunch of the stuff, basically. So that's how you do this. And again, you can just chat your way to this, provided you know it exists. Like Claude is not going to tell you, oh, you could host it on a Cloudflare worker. But if you know, you can say, hey, I want to host it on a Cloudflare worker. Can you help me figure this out? And it's going to help you install the Cloudflare, it's called Wrangler thing for the terminal. And then Cloud Code is going to essentially use that terminal to push your files to Cloudflare.
Cloudflare is essentially giving you that ability to host it for free. Why? Yeah. Like, why aren't they charging money?
Because they're like an enterprise platform, and this is peanuts for them. Basically, when you buy something like Kinsta or something like an expensive host, they're basically using this. This is the host of the hosts. And what's happening is they just mark it up massively. But for Cloudflare, like this volume is nothing. It doesn't matter to them. And so that's almost their free trial. But for small businesses, that's enough. Like for small businesses, they're actually free. And then it's like, let's say you wanted to jump, I think you can get 10 million even per month, not per day, for $20 per month with Cloudflare, including more security features, etc. as well. So it's like, it's a lot, basically. And the point of learning all that stuff is you get to cut your costs a lot. Because, like, yeah, as I said, you can replace a Kinsta that would cost you like $99 a month or something with a free solution. The good thing with Cloudflare as well is it connects to GitHub. So you know how I showed you can save your work with GitHub here? Like, I could connect this to GitHub. That would go, if I essentially committed it and pushed it, it would go on github.com. And then I can connect Cloudflare to github.com for a specific branch, part of my savings, like a folder in my GitHub. And what it's going to do is every time I push new code on this branch, it's going to put it directly on the internet. So I know that if I push my code to this one branch, automatically within 10 to 15 seconds, my website is updated, basically. So that allows you to work locally, which means it's very fast. You can see, for example, it broke the site. Great. That happens. It's great. We actually get to show how it works. So you can see that what I can do literally is I can go.
Yeah, show us what happens when you encounter a problem like this, because
exactly.
I know from working at any end, like most of the time you spend not actually building the thing. It's like it's troubleshooting and fixing
that happens.
Bugs and errors.
That's what I said. You build or you debug, right? We just switched from building to debugging. Without wanting. The point with Astro is it shows you the errors as well. So like there's a lot of information here. I could just copy this. Sometimes it makes sense also to right click and inspect and go in the console. And you actually have some information here as well that you could give to the LLM. But the point is like then you go back to cursor. It still wants to do stuff though. What does it want to do? File exists. Let's just stop what it's doing. And you can press escape at any point and stop its work and be like, hey, no, just refocus. I'll say, it looks like you broke the site. Make a plan to fix it. Again, I always use the plan mode before I actually do that. Now, it's a bad prompt. I'm just going fast, right? And I would just like go to the next line. I'll put like hashtag for like essentially H1. I put logs and then I paste the stuff that I copied on the web page, right? And it's like, because it can read this, it should be able to understand what is broken, make a plan to fix it, prepare, think, and then eventually when I say approve, it will just fix it basically. But that happens. It's part of vibe coding. It's not something that you need to be worried about. out. Okay, going back to Cloudflare, yeah, it's amazing. It's cheap. It's free, basically. And they have lots of security features, which helps. Now, is it going to be enough for BrandSnap? I don't know. This was a pretty risky app to build, so I'm not even sure it will stay live, as I said. But if there is any place I want it to be, it's on Cloudflare using all these features like turnstile. And there's a bunch of like zero trust, etc. options. It has something, for example, that monitors the input. And then if it feels like it's dodgy, it blocks it before it reaches our API point, for example. Lots of security, basically.
So can we move on and talk about testing now? Because you mentioned that you went to the gym and it ran a bunch of tests while you were away, and then came back and everything had kind of been sorted. Why does one need to test something like this? And what actually is testing? How do we do that in here?
The way it works is the way good code is written normally is actually before developers build something, they write a test, and this test should fail. And the test is like, for example, we have tests to test like the domain generation. It kind of like takes a part of your code, and it's just like there is testing frameworks that you can install, and you tweak them for your need. You write the test, and it should fail, and you write code so that the test passes. And then when it passes, it means your code works, basically. The good thing is like AI can help you pick the frameworks that you can actually install based on your tech stack. So it depends what you're using for your tech stack. Like with the /init, it understood. And then it writes the tests for you and it runs them. And essentially it maintains a test pass score. So for example, before I deployed BrandSnap, like before we tested at the end, we only passed like 70% of the tests. And then by essentially rerunning the tests after building a bunch of stuff, it got information that allowed it to fix security issues in the code. And we got up to 96% or something like this of the tests fail, with some of them that were supposed to fail. And so that is another part of security, basically. So it's like, you need to run these tests. Again, I'm not a developer, so I cannot talk about this in great details, but from the framework I understand on how development works is you write the test first, it fails, you write the code, it passes, and after building a bunch of times, you probably should run these tests again before you go to deployment to make sure you haven't made these tests fails again, basically. So that's how it works.
Okay.
By the way, Cloud Code just finished fix the site. Okay, it looks a bit better, but still needs some work, basically. But the point is that it can one-shot a starter landing page, and then you can keep working on it. Do you see that the background is like my photo?
It's a big that, if I'm being honest with you, yeah. I don't know how it's picked that
Do you
up.
see it's my photo behind?
Yeah.
That's pretty weird. Okay, again,
I
we did not
think
give it
like
any instructions.
as a comparison, right? If you're looking to do like pixel perfect copy of like not a simple website, then like, okay, you're going to have some issues like this. But if you flip it around and you didn't have anything to start with and you say, hey, I want to build a website for my dog training business, and you're not like having that comparison, you'd be like, okay, this is a really good place to start. I just need to tweak a few things here. And
again, if I wrote a prompt that says, okay, these need to be on one line, this is too big, the button is like too dark here, like the colors are wrong, they should be using these two colors. Like if I took the time to actually write feedback and make a prompt, be like, here's the files for the background, I could go get them on WordPress, for example, and give it to it. You know what I mean? I can do all this stuff. Or I could even tell it the file is wrong for the background, go get it. But it got it all right. Like, the fonts are right. Most of the colors are pretty correct, like the CTA button, etc. And then there's some cool stuff, like the way it handles the logos here is kind of nice, actually. And so, like, it's not perfect, but again, I gave it almost nothing. This was literally just like, do what you can. There's 3 Twitters, apparently. But again, this is very easy to fix. That's why it takes some time. Like getting the first version takes time. And after that, it's just a lot of feedback and fixing. But it just shows you like it builds stuff. Remember, we spent a whole podcast building a website.
Yep.
This literally did it where we just chatted, right?
Like we didn't have to do it. We just chatted and it did it in the background. Yeah.
It did it, right?
That was only 4 weeks ago, Gail.
Yeah. Like this, just to put this in context a little bit, like we literally haven't put any work in this other than an initial prompt and just saying yes to everything.
Okay, so I mean, that brings me on to my next point then. You're seeing the progression of this almost live across a few episodes of this podcast. Where is this going? Like, what are we going to be able to do in a year's time?
I think the progress will not necessarily be as visible going forward, in the sense that what's really impressive is, you can prompt and you get something really quickly like this, but then you spend a lot of time kind of like actually correcting. And I think the time to correct, that will just shrink as we progress. It will get more right, like it will get the right background. I will not put my photo in the background here, that kind of stuff. But it's not necessarily going to be as spectacular in the sense that you essentially you still one-shot a lot of stuff, but it will be closer to production. It will be safer. I think you see this code rabbit thing I showed you that essentially just reviews your code for AI, etc. Like these tools are going to explode because obviously more people are using AI for coding. There is some security issues with coding with AI, especially if you put the wrong prompts. So there's a need, and companies are going to jump in and actually just provide solutions to fix that problem. Maybe Cloudflare is going to have a solution that also makes sure that, it secures all your AI code. You kind of tick a box. It knows it's written by AI. It does a bunch of checks. You know what I mean? Like that's going to allow you to use these things more in production, whereas now it's still a little bit experimental. I think that's where it's going.
You kind of hit the nail on the head there. This is very much like at the cutting edge of what's possible right now. And I think the intimidation factor of, even looking at the screen in front of you right there, it's still very high. And your average business owner isn't going to want to kind of dabble too much in that. Like maybe, if you're making your first website with this and you're kind of comfortable with a bit of HTML or something, like maybe. But I think there needs to be a simpler interface to it than having to install and set up all the local host stuff and install the MCPs.
They exist, but they're not as good. Like this is kind of like, because you're willing to just work on the terminal, like they can push an update daily and change things. Whereas when you work on something like Lovable or something, everything's behind. And also because this is provided by Entropic directly, use Lovable, they pay Entropic for the API, right? They might have a discounted rate, but Entropic's taking a profit here.
Whereas, it's a good point. Like what you mentioned with all the hosting companies essentially reselling, the super cheap hosting at source that they get from Cloudflare or whatever.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, like Lovable's, reselling the super cheap vibe coding they get.
So they have to make a profit. So essentially they don't give you all your money's worth. Whereas Entropic can literally run at cost or even at a loss for market.
My argument is that I think for a lot of people, it's worth paying that bit extra for the simplicity and the peace of mind and maybe a little bit support on there rather than, you have to figure out all of this yourself. And, it's not a small amount of time to do it.
I agree. I think it's like, if you're not willing to learn all this stuff, don't do it. To the point where, as I said, I'm not sure BrandSnap stays online. Because it's not necessarily like 100% safe. But
different story for like the Marketing Pros website or the System Stack one that you built.
Because what's the worst that can happen? Like you can try to DDoS it, and you cannot abuse like the form fill and just cost us lots of money or things like that, right? So it's like there's different risks to different things you're building. I think building Astro sites is like no problem. This is ready. Again, it will require a bit of feedback, but it would require feedback on Lovable too and all that stuff. And arguably Claude is more powerful. Like Lovable cannot go and download the images on the site and reuse them, for example. That's not possible. So it's like for these kind of projects, even for like small calculators and things that don't have high stakes in the backend, like it's fine, it's ready. Like even if it's slightly broken, it's not going to hurt your business very much. It's better than not having it. For full, like you're going to build a SaaS in one prompt. No, I don't think it's right. Maybe if you're a developer, maybe who knows, like maybe developers are much better than me at using these tools. And there's much deeper levels to Claude Code as well. This is like super surface level what I'm showing you. But Claude Code can actually make multiple sub-Claude codes that it manages. So it's like it can manage a team of multiple
it makes
Claude
its own
codes
junior developers then.
Yeah.
Wow.
So like now there's like extensions to Claude Code that I'm looking at where essentially it has like multiple personalities it spawned, and it also breaks down the tasks and distributes them to its team that gets the reports from and then just kind of talks to you as the CEO basically. So like it can be fucking crazy. And this is not even the cutting edge. This is just the cutting edge. There's one level deep.
If you're running a small business and maybe you have one or two developers working for you, should they start using this stuff now? Or, are you seeing developers like embrace this, or is there a bit of resistance in the industry?
I think there's two sides, right? It's like, as everything with AI, some people are really excited by it and embrace it, and some people don't. My take, I'll give you an example. It's like, I think for video editing, right? We used to edit our podcast on Premiere Pro and do all that stuff, etc. And editing the podcast used to take like 3 days at least to a professional video editor on a high salary. The podcast is now not as good. It's edited on Descript, but it's, let's say, 20 to 25% less good. But it's done by someone that costs 4 times less money in half of the time. Mm-hmm. As a small business, the value of being able to output things faster and cheaper, while honestly, it hasn't changed much to how well the podcast does, is quite valuable. And I think there's a little bit of this to take away with development as well, where again, it's not going to be as good as a really good developers. And I think we're far away from it. It's kind of like dumb sometimes. Like it's super smart and dumb at the same time. I think of it as, like kind of like prodigies that are socially inept. So it's like they can solve crazy equations, but then they don't understand the most basic things in the workspace, so they're useless. And they need some kind of mentor or chaperone or something. You're the chaperone to AI, basically. And you need to translate what it does to the real world and also translate the real world information to it so that it can actually produce value. But I would force my developers to play with this if I had one right now. I don't have one right now. But if I did, I think these things are only going to get better, and you can already do crazy things. And if you don't, there's a depth to this as well. You can spawn a team of agents working together, working on your code. It can go quite deep in terms of skill set to run these AI agents, actually. It's a skill. It's not just write some prompts. We've shown you like super, super basic stuff on this podcast because we're time limited, but you can push it very hard, especially with all these MCP servers. So if they don't pick up that skill, your team will be left behind eventually when these models get much closer to being able to create production level code, basically.
Right. Any final words of wisdom then?
Don't do it if you're not willing to learn properly. I've spent a lot of time reading. I spent a lot of time doing that stuff. And again, what I've shown you on the podcast is stuff I can do in 5 minutes quickly because nobody cares for watching me write a really long prompt or doing some web research at the same time or whatever. Limit yourself to Astro websites if you're just going to not learn too much. But if you have always wanted to build things and you couldn't, like I was in that case, this feels great, actually. This feels like there's opportunities and they will keep opening up. And I'm excited for it. But don't take it lightly. AI doesn't mean all the work is automated. It doesn't mean there's no work. As I know after spending a week and rebuilding things multiple times because I overtrusted AI sometimes.
Okay, brilliant. I think we'll wrap it up there then. If you like this and you want more from us in terms of like vibe coding and talking about this stuff, then make sure to subscribe. Leave a comment if you've built something yourself. We'd love to hear what you guys are up to as well. Otherwise, we'll see you in a couple of weeks for another episode.